Sarah stormed into my office, her tone sharp. "Jason, you're out. The board has decided." I froze. How could they force me out of the company I built? Minutes later, a message buzzed on my phone. "If you think Sarah's betrayal is bad, wait until you hear what Angela and David are hiding." My world began to crumble. The hum of the city skyline outside my corner office had always been a comfort. The glass walls reflected the golden hues of the setting sun, a sharp contrast to the icy tension that filled the room. Sarah Reeves, my company's CEO, stood opposite me, her posture stiff, her arms crossed. The woman I had trusted to lead my company, the company I built from the ground up, was about to upend my life. I just didn't know it yet. "Jason, this is for the best," Sarah said, her voice calm but calculated. "The board has decided you should step down as chairman." I froze, her words a sharp slap to my composure. "Step down," I echoed, barely able to keep my voice steady. "I own 90% of this company, Sarah. You don't get to make that call." She sighed, her expression unreadable. "Jason, Apex has outgrown you. The board believes it's time for fresh leadership. A transition." My jaw tightened. "This isn't a transition. This is a coup." Her lips twitched into a faint smile. "Call it what you will. The vote is scheduled for Friday." I stared at her, searching for a crack in her mask, a sign of hesitation. But her eyes were cold steel, devoid of remorse. Something darker was at play, and I intended to find out what. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt interminable. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and most painfully, betrayal. I trusted Sarah. For years, she was my right hand, the one who handled the operations while I focused on innovation. When had that trust eroded into this? My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Claire, my assistant and the one person who had never failed me. "Jason," she said, her voice low, "you need to see this." "What is it?" "I've been going through Sarah's communications. There's something disturbing." "Send it to me." I hung up and stepped into my car. As the engine roared to life, my email pinged. The files Claire had sent revealed a series of emails between Sarah and my brother, David. David and I hadn't spoken in years. Growing up, we were close, inseparable even. But as adults, we became rivals in everything. While I was building Apex Tech, David had a string of failed startups and bad investments. I had bailed him out more than once, but the last time he burned me, I swore it would be the last. Now, seeing his name in Sarah's emails sent a chill down my spine. The emails hinted at secret meetings, financial transactions, and plans to restructure Apex once I was removed. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Richard, my lawyer and longtime friend. "Jason, I've been digging into the board filings," he said without preamble. "Sarah's rallying the directors to vote you out. They've got just enough support to push it through." "What's David's role in this?" I asked, my voice tight. "That's the thing," Richard said. "He's using his old connections to siphon company funds. They've set up shell corporations to launder money. If this comes out, it'll bury Apex." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. "They're not just coming for my company. They're coming for me." That night, I went home to the high-rise apartment I shared with my wife, Angela, and our daughter Emily. The familiar warmth of the living room, a space we had designed together, felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Angela was in the kitchen, her laughter echoing as she chatted on the phone. Emily, our 16-year-old, sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Hey, Dad," Emily said without looking up. I managed a tired smile. "How was school?" "Fine," she mumbled, her attention still glued to the screen. Angela hung up and joined us, her smile radiant. "You're home early," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Rough day." "Something like that," I replied, my mind still clouded with Sarah's betrayal. Later that night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Angela stirred beside me. "Jason, you've been distant lately. Is something wrong?" I hesitated. Angela had always been my anchor, the one person who kept me grounded. But tonight, her concern felt hollow. "It's work," I said finally. Sarah and the board are trying to push me out. Angela frowned. Why would they do that? You're the heart of Apex. That's what I thought, I muttered. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch light but unfamiliar. You'll handle it. You always do. Her words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened the unease gnawing at me. The next morning, as I prepared to leave for the office, a delivery arrived. A plain manila envelope addressed to me. Inside was a DNA test result. Emily Carter is not biologically related to Jason Carter. I stared at the paper, my heart pounding in my chest. The world tilted beneath me as the implications sank in. Angela, the woman I had trusted, loved, built a life with, had betrayed me. My phone buzzed, jolting me from my shock. It was Richard. Jason, we've got a bigger problem, he said. The shell corporations tied to David, they're draining funds faster than we thought. If we don't act now, we'll lose control of the company. I clenched the DNA results in my hand, a fresh wave of anger washing over me. Richard, this isn't just about the company anymore. It's personal. That evening, I confronted Angela. She didn't deny it. Her calm demeanor only infuriated me more. You knew, I said, my voice shaking. You knew Emily wasn't mine, and you let me believe. You're her father, Jason, Angela interrupted, her tone sharp. Not biologically, maybe, but in every way that matters. That doesn't make this right, I shouted. Who is he? Who's her father? Angela hesitated, then sighed. David. The room spun. My brother. My daughter. My company. The betrayal was suffocating. I stood there, my chest heaving, as Angela watched me with an unreadable expression. Finally, I spoke. You and David both think you can take everything from me. My company, my daughter, my life. But you're wrong. You've underestimated me. With my family fractured and my company under siege, I knew I had to act. Claire and Richard became my closest allies as I began gathering evidence of Sarah and David's schemes. But this was more than a corporate battle now. This was about reclaiming everything they had stolen. My trust, my dignity, and my legacy. I was no longer just fighting for Apex. I was fighting for myself. The days that followed were a blur of strategy meetings, sleepless nights, and searing anger. Every corner of my life was collapsing. Sarah and David were closing in on my company. Angela's betrayal left a chasm in my marriage, and Emily, the girl I had raised as my own, felt like a stranger. Claire was the only person who seemed unshaken by the storm. She sat across from me in my office, her laptop open, files spread across the desk. Jason, she said, breaking the silence, I've traced the funds from David's shell corporations. It's worse than we thought. They're leveraging Apex as collateral for loans. I pinched the bridge of my nose. How much? Over $20 million, she said quietly. And if those loans default, the creditors will come straight for Apex. Of course they will, I muttered. It's not just about taking the company, they want to destroy it. Claire hesitated, then leaned forward. There's something else. I found a connection between Sarah and Angela. My stomach dropped. What kind of connection? Claire turned her laptop around to show me an email chain. Sarah had been in contact with Angela for months, feeding her information about my absence, my meetings, even my moods. She's been helping them, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Angela's been feeding them ammunition. That evening, I returned home to find Angela in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. The domesticity of it felt grotesque after everything I'd learned. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, she said without looking up. I stood in the doorway, the weight of the DNA results and Sarah's emails pressing down on me. How long, Angela? She froze, the spoon clattering against the pot. How long what? How long have you been working with Sarah? How long have you been lying to me about Emily? She turned slowly, her face pale. Jason, I can explain. Explain. I snapped, my voice rising. Explain how you slept with my brother? How you let me raise his child while stabbing me in the back? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't let her speak. You were part of this the whole time, weren't you? Helping Sarah and David. Selling me out. Angela's voice cracked as she finally responded. I didn't want to hurt you, Jason. I was desperate. David said he could help us. Help Emily. Her words hit me like a blow. Help Emily? By destroying her father's life. She doesn't know, Jason, Angela whispered. She doesn't know David is her biological father. Please, don't take it out on her. Don't, I said coldly. Don't you dare ask me to protect you or him. You've already taken everything from me. The next day, I called Richard and Claire to a meeting at my house. I laid out everything. The DNA test, Angela's betrayal, and her connection to Sarah. We can use this, Richard said, his voice measured. If Angela and Sarah were conspiring, it's another nail in Sarah's coffin. But at what cost? Claire interjected, her brow furrowed. Dragging Angela and Emily into this could destroy Jason's personal life entirely. My personal life is already in ruins, I said flatly. If Angela and David want to burn everything to the ground, I'll make sure they go down with it. As we strategized, a text from Emily lit up my phone. Dad, can we talk? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Did she know? Or was she just a pawn in this mess? As blind as I had been? Jason, Claire said gently. She's your daughter, no matter what the DNA says. Don't lose sight of that. I nodded, though my resolve remained firm. I had to protect Apex, even if it meant tearing apart what was left of my family. Later that evening, I met Emily at a coffee shop near her school. She was already seated, fidgeting with the lid of her cup. When she saw me, her face lit up in a way that twisted the knife in my chest. Hey, Dad, she said, her voice soft. I forced a smile. Hey, kiddo. For a moment, we sat in silence, the din of the cafe filling the gaps between us. Mom's been acting weird, Emily said finally. She's nervous all the time, and she keeps saying we should stick together. What's going on? I studied her face, searching for any hint of deceit. But all I saw was the girl I had raised, the daughter who had called me Daddy when she was scared, who had cheered me on at her school plays. Emily, I began, my throat tightening. There's something I need to tell you. Her expression shifted, fear creeping into her eyes. What is it? Before I could speak, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. Urgent. Sarah knows about the emails. I cursed under my breath. I'll tell you everything soon, I promised Emily. But right now, I need you to trust me. The following morning, I arrived at the Apex headquarters with a plan. Sarah had called an emergency board meeting, likely to counter whatever moves I was making. But I had no intention of letting her control the narrative. The boardroom was tense, the air heavy with anticipation. Sarah sat at the head of the table, her confidence intact despite the chaos swirling around her. David was conspicuously absent. Jason, Sarah said, her tone icy. Care to explain why you've been digging into company records without authorization? Care to explain why you've been funneling company funds into shell corporations with my brother? I shot back, dropping a stack of documents onto the table. The board members leaned forward, their faces etched with confusion and concern. I have evidence, I continued, that Sarah and David have been embezzling funds and leveraging Apex for personal gain. And it doesn't stop there. Sarah has been conspiring with Angela, my wife, to undermine my position and destabilize this company. Sarah's composure faltered, but only for a moment. This is a desperate attempt to discredit me, she said, her voice steady. Jason has been erratic for months. He's grasping at straws. Am I? I retorted, turning to the board. If I'm wrong, why did Sarah approve $20 million in unsecured loans? Why has she been meeting with David off the record? The room erupted in murmurs, the board members exchanging uneasy glances. Sarah's mask finally cracked. You're making a mistake, Jason. If you pursue this, it will destroy you. No, Sarah, I said, my voice firm. It will destroy you. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to suspend Sarah pending further investigation. The tide was turning in my favor, but the cost of victory weighed heavily. Angela's betrayal, Emily's unspoken questions, and the looming shadow of David's involvement left scars I wasn't sure would ever heal. As I stepped out of the boardroom, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from David. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as anger and exhaustion swirled within me. If David thought he could talk his way out of this, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. David's message burned a hole in my mind as I drove to the secluded address he'd sent me. A quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, far from prying eyes. Whatever he had to say, it wouldn't be good. When I arrived, David was already there, seated in a booth near the back. He looked disheveled, a shadow of the confident man I remembered. His usual cocky grin was gone, replaced by a haunted expression that almost made me pity him. "Jason," he said as I slid into the booth opposite him. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept in days. "Talk," I said coldly, "and make it quick." David ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling. "You have to understand, I never meant for it to go this far. You've been working with Sarah for months," I snapped. "You used my company, stole my money, and destroyed my family. How far did you mean to go?" He flinched but held my gaze. "I was desperate, okay? After my last business failed, I had nothing. Sarah offered me a way out." "And Angela?" I demanded. "Was she part of your way out, too?" David's face crumpled. That was a mistake. A long time ago. I didn't know she was going to lie to you about Emily." "Convenient," I said, my voice laced with venom. "You didn't know, and yet you've been playing happy family behind my back for years." David leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Jason, I'm sorry. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. But Sarah, she's dangerous. She has dirt on all of us. If we don't stop her, she'll burn Apex to the ground." "Then help me," I said, my tone sharp. "Give me everything you have on her." For a moment, David hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but I need something in return." I stiffened. "You're in no position to make demands." "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "Help me fix things with Emily. She doesn't know everything, but she'll hate me when she finds out. I want a chance to make it right." I stared at him, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let him drown in the mess he'd created. But another part, a quieter, more human part, remembered the brother he used to be. "Fine," I said at last. "But if you screw me over again, you'll regret it." With David's cooperation, I had the last pieces of the puzzle. Bank records, email chains, and internal memos, all pointing to Sarah's corruption. Richard and Claire worked tirelessly to compile everything into an airtight case. Meanwhile, I prepared for what would be the most important shareholder meeting in Apex's history. The morning of the meeting, I stood in the mirror, adjusting my tie. Angela watched from the doorway, her expression a mix of guilt and sadness. "You're really going through with this?" she said quietly. I met her gaze in the reflection. "I don't have a choice." "What about us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What about Emily?" I turned to face her, my expression hard. "You made your choices, Angela. Now I have to make mine." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Jason, for everything." I didn't respond. The weight of her apology wasn't enough to undo the damage she'd done. The Apex conference room buzzed with tension as shareholders and board members filed in. Sarah sat at the head of the table, her composure intact, though her eyes darted nervously around the room. David was nowhere to be seen. He had refused to attend, citing fear of retaliation from Sarah. I entered last, carrying a leather briefcase filled with evidence. As I approached the table, the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice steady, "we're here to discuss the future of Apex. Jason Carter has proven to be a distraction and a liability. It's time for a change in leadership." Before she could continue, I stood and opened the briefcase. "Before anyone makes a decision, there's something you all need to see." I distributed the documents, watching as the room erupted into murmurs and gasps. Sarah's face paled as the evidence of her embezzlement, collusion with David, and attempts to sabotage the company were laid bare. "This is absurd," she sputtered. "These documents are fabricated." "They're not," I said calmly. "And if anyone needs further proof, I have recordings of her meetings with David, where they discussed their plans in detail." I pressed play on my phone, the room filling with Sarah's voice as she outlined her strategy to seize control of Apex. The board members stared at her, their expressions ranging from shock to fury. "Sarah Reeves," the chairman said finally, his tone cold, "you're hereby terminated as CEO, effective immediately." Sarah shot to her feet, her composure crumbling. "You can't do this. You'll regret." "Guards," the chairman interrupted. "Escort her out." As she was led away, her eyes met mine, burning with hatred. "This isn't over, Jason," she hissed. "Yes, it is," I replied, my voice steady. With Sarah gone, the board moved to reinstate me as chairman. But the victory felt hollow. Apex was safe, but my personal life was still in shambles. Angela moved out of the apartment that night, taking Emily with her. We agreed on shared custody, though our interactions remained strained. Emily struggled to process the truth about her parentage, and our relationship was far from what it once was. David disappeared after the shareholder meeting, leaving behind only a short note. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me." Months passed, and Apex began to rebuild. The scars of Sarah's betrayal and David's greed were still visible, but the company was stronger for having survived. Claire became my most trusted advisor, and Richard remained a steadfast ally. One evening, as I stood in my office overlooking the city, Emily called. Her voice was hesitant but warm. "Dad," she said, "I was thinking, maybe we could have dinner sometime. Just us." I smiled, a small but genuine glimmer of hope piercing the darkness. "I'd like that." As I hung up, I realized that while the wounds of betrayal might never fully heal, there was still a chance for redemption. For my family, for Apex, and for myself.